This is a genuine game changer. It's LMU FFB, which is an application that fully replaces or partially replaces Le Mans Ultimate's default force feedback. Very similar to IRFFB or Mirror, Marvin's awesome iRacing app, which does the same thing for iRacing. Needless to say, this, for me, makes Le Mans Ultimate 1,000 times more intuitive, fun, and easier to drive than if you're not using this app. And it works really, really well. You have to try it. You just have to try it. If you've got a force feedback wheel, you have to try this because it's fundamentally just interesting how it works, what it does, and what you can do with it. Now, for those of you that don't want to fiddle around with stuff, I've created profiles already for the GT3 cars, LMP2, that's one profile for both those types of cars, and we've created a profile for the hypercar on our Patreon, link underneath the video. It's totally free. You have to sign into our Patreon, but it's totally free for you to access that file, and then you can download LMU FFB app through the GitHub link that's there, and just import our file and start driving straight away without having to fiddle, and you'll immediately see how much better it is. We did spend 14 hours setting it up, so it felt nice. But yeah, saving you time, you can just get the profile, go to our Patreon link. It's all explained on that link. But for those of you that want to know more details, what the settings do, fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be a boring video. Thanks to everybody that subscribes. Really appreciate that. You need to subscribe so you can unsubscribe, and then you won't be inundated with force feedback videos. Thanks for clicking the like button if you find this useful, and mega thanks to all our channel members, supporters, donors. Really appreciate it. It allows us to spend time doing stuff like this, which is so niche and ridiculous, but absolutely awesome. So, first things first, download this from GitHub, link in the description, and definitely download the profiles we've done on our Patreon as a start point, because there are a hell of a lot of options, and it's not the most intuitive of applications to use. So our profile is, I would say, the good profiles to get started with, and actually perfectly fine in general. The profiles we've set up, I'm not claiming they're the best profiles, and they're not even ideal to what I would necessarily want to have. I've set profiles up that are very good, in my opinion, baseline profiles, where they give you good detail, but they're not too overactive, they're quite tame, and then you can tweak them and do more with them if you want to. You could just drive with them. I don't think you would need to change them. I think the force feedback with my profiles is better than maybe Race Room in some ways, but you know, just do whatever you want with it. They're good baseline, so get those, and then it'll make things a lot more simple. So once you've installed the application, select your wheelbase, import the profile, click import preset, load it up, you should be able to select it. The GT3 profile we've got is called Gamer Muscle T2_2.2. Don't worry about that. The hypercar profile is like Gamer Muscle Hyper. I'm not very good at naming stuff, but you select it, and then that will load the profile and all the settings here. Now, the main settings to be aware of, especially when it comes to just twiddling with my profile, I've set these profiles up as if people have a sort of 12 Newton meter wheel or so. So if you have like a 21 Newton meter wheel, just set your wheel strength in your wheel to 50. If you've got a 12 Newton meter wheel, it should sort of be about the same as what we've got here. If you've got a lower Newton meter wheel, you might want to twiddle with the strength a little bit and stuff, but we've just set up for 12 Newton meters in mind, as again, that's kind of right in the middle, general benchmark for people, so probably cover most people. But once you've selected the profile, the main settings that you can change that will have the biggest effect and allow you to really feel a big difference and dial things in quickly is going to be the master gain setting, which is the overall strength setting. You can set this to 100, but I think we've saved it at 80. If you want to turn that down or up, you can do that. You might introduce clipping if you turn that too high, but that's a way of controlling all of the strength of everything, so you can increase the strength or decrease that. You have a wheelbase max torque setting, which generally speaking with these types of applications, you would want to set this to what your wheelbase is actually able to do. So if you've got a 12 Newton meter wheelbase, you generally set it to 12, and if you had a 21, you'd set it to 21, and you know, whatever you want. However, what I found with this setting is that if you want weaker or stronger force feedback, it's actually better to put this a higher number, and that'll give you a weaker force feedback, but it tends to get you a little bit more dynamic range, though weaker. But if you want it stronger, you can lower this number, and that will make things more immediate and stronger. But again, it can lower the dynamics. I'm not quite sure why this is the case. In a sense, logically speaking, it could be that if you increase this, it's expanding the signal. But don't worry about it. The main thing is, if you want the force feedback to be a bit weaker, increase this number. If you want it to be stronger, decrease it. If the wheel feels too overactive, or the bumps are crazy, or you know, and you just want to quickly adjust the wheel so it's still so you're not getting over the top stuff, just increase this number, and you'll see it actually works quite well. The next setting is target rim torque, and again you can move this up and down. Lower, if you set this to higher, that will actually make it stronger at the wheel. If you set this lower, it will make it weaker at the lower and weaker at the wheel. And you can use this as a way to sort of control the maximum strength that your wheel will ever get to from the output of this. I know that's really confusing, isn't it, having 3 settings? I would say at first, probably just focus on either increasing or decreasing this master gain setting. That's what I would focus on. It's already getting a bit confusing. Don't you love twiddling dials? I certainly do. The next thing is this min force setting. I would leave that at 0. This setting can be useful if you're on a really shoddy wheelbase and the wheelbase isn't even starting to move from basic forces. I personally wouldn't even use this on a T300. Min 4 settings, even on like G25s and very like really low end wheels, although G25, G293, those wheels are still quite good in many ways. But even when you use it on those, you tend to actually create a dead zone by using min force, because you end up with the forces only come in at a certain point. So I would always keep min force at 0, whatever wheel. That's my personal preference. Stationary dampening. This is when you're stationary, the wheel will have a bit of damper to it, so it's not totally free, and also stops like vibrations and oscillations from like tyre noise and random stuff that can happen. We've got that set to 16. You can turn this up. You might notice if you turn it really high, there might be some vibrations that happen, so you might want to actually turn this down if when you park there's weird vibrations. Just turn this down a bit. I think that's a bug that they've actually fixed now, but that's something to be aware of. Hands-off smart protection. This is to stop oscillations. It's like an equivalent of a hands-off protection where the wheel goes totally crazy. You don't necessarily need to use this. However, I found with the hypercar, and sometimes if you're running stronger settings elsewhere, you might want to turn that up, and that will actually stop like crazy oscillations. So I wouldn't necessarily, it's not necessarily like hands-off protection in the same sense that you would have on your wheelbase, which is designed purely to stop your wheel going absolutely crazy. You can kind of think of it as more of like a way to just stop oscillations. It's not the same as damping, which also stops oscillations, but if you're going down the straight and you've got stronger settings and bumps are making your wheel go crazy, that can be a thing to turn up to help with that. And we actually, on our hypercar profile, we'll actually have this turned up a bit because the hypercars are more prone to those kind of oscillations. So that can be quite useful. But if you increase that, you end up with a slightly more muted signal, and you can lose a bit of fidelity and detail. So it's always a compromise, like everything. But that's what that does. Gyro Smooth filters the steering velocity signal used for damping. I've not used that setting, so I can't comment on it. You can have this app open whilst you're driving, by the way, and just move settings whilst you're driving to see what does what and have a feel for it, which I highly recommend doing because it's fascinating. Also, I should have said this earlier on, I highly recommend turning your wheelbase's force feedback, maybe even down to like 8 newton meters. But I mean, it should be all right at 12. But like, turn your wheelbase on the wheelbase itself to a level so that if something crazy happens or you mess something up, you're not going to risk your wrists exploding. And then only turn it up on your wheelbase when you're happy that everything's all sorted and you know, maybe done a bit of driving with it. I personally would always set my wheelbase firmware to the maximum strength that I'm happy with, for which isn't going to break my wrists. I don't know why you wouldn't ever really want your wheel to have the capacity to do something that's crazy. And I learnt that from using like 30, 40 newton meter wheelbases. With 20 newton meter and lower, it's unlikely that your hands are going to get ripped off. But when you're using the early OSWs, that was actually a real concern. Instantaneous 40 newton meters is not a pleasant experience, I can tell you from experience. Not pleasant from experience. Right, let's continue going on here. Soft lock setting, I actually turned that off. I always find soft lock stuff messes up. Probably better to use your firmware on your wheelbase for soft lock. That tends to work better on the firmware. I don't like to use it. I just don't see the point. I don't turn more than you're going to get any input from the vehicle, so I'm never going to hit the bump stop. There are occasions where you might do, but that's up to you. You can use that if you want to. Now this, oh my goodness, this is like the most exciting force feedback effect here. And this is actually super, super interesting. This brake feel effect. What this does is when you brake when you brake, it increases the load of the force feedback. Basically, it's taking the longitudinal G load on the tyre, or the longitudinal grip of the tyre, and that's then making it the steering heavier. Which means that when you brake, you can then feel how much you're braking in the force feedback. That's quite useful. If you set it up really strong, it will be over the top and it will override the other signals and will get in the way of the details that you might want. But setting this from between 14 to 40% gets you absolutely phenomenal feel for how much you're braking, to know that you're braking, which is something a lot of people struggle with, but how hard you're braking. And then once you've when you're braking and once you do one lockup or make a mistake on one lap, you then know how much G load, lateral longitudinal load it is before the wheels will lock up again. So you then have like a really good haptic picture in your mind for how much load it is, or the feel when you're turning and braking and trail braking, for when you're going to lock up, or when you're going to induce too much oversteer, or just that you're maybe riding the brake pedal a bit too much or not enough. It's absolutely fantastic. I would say you do have to be careful with the brake feel setting. If you turn it on really high, you'll find that when you, especially with the hypercars, when you're turning and you get the brake aggressive, the wheel might like try and centre itself a bit too aggressively. So it really is a case of how much you're happy with and dial it into your taste. We've set it quite low on our GT3 profile, so it's relatively muted, but it's enough that you should be able to feel a good range of force for braking. I think we've set it a little bit higher on the hypercar, because those cars, you really do want to feel the braking, and the faster cars you'd expect to feel more brake feel. But really you want to play around with that. And hilariously, we've got a seatbelt tensioner on this rig, Cubic Systems BT1. Bloody amazing seatbelt tensioner. I love it. Feels really great for immersion. But ironically, this brake feel setting is more immediate and more detailed for you to be able to drive from and balance the car than the way this belt tensioner, for the most part. I think if you've got a belt tensioner with rollers and stuff, then it's going to be a little bit closer. Belt tensioner is more immersive and more literal. But this is just a setting that will work on most DD wheels. Like, all sims should have the force feedback, or an option that makes force feedback load up when longitudinal grip increases. It's a game changer. But there you go. Understeer effect, another really good, useful effect. This is basically when you're understeering, the force feedback gets lighter. You have to be really careful with this effect, because if you increase it too much, a small amount of understeer will make the wheel get really, really light. and then you won't be able to feel anything. And also, if the understeer effect is too high, then the understeer is going to make the force so vague that oversteer and braking effect and all the other stuff is going to be subdued too much. Like, you're not going to feel the other stuff. So you need to be quite careful with how you balance and mix these things together so that you're actually getting a really useful signal without the different things counteracting each other. That's what's really taken the time to really dial in when it's come to getting the settings, so that we've dialed it in so that you can feel the car and the settings aren't counteracting each other, and they also line up with what the vehicle's doing. Because with this app, you could potentially make it so the force feedback's telling you information that's completely wrong to what the car's doing. It will completely throw you off. And you never really want force feedback to be giving you wrong information. You want it to be not over the top. You want it to help you to drive, and then you still want to be fundamentally in control of the vehicle. So the basic sort of self-aligning and the basic feel of the vehicle is the most important thing, but then you've got these other layers that give more information for what's going on to help you understand the loading of the car and what have you. Worth also saying, the brake feel, back to that again, the advantage of the brake feel setting is that because you're only going to get the brake feel happening when you're on the brake going into a corner and trail braking, right? Well, because that loads the force feedback up, that then increases the load on the wheel, which means you then have more force feedback available to subtract for things like understeer or other effects. So the brake feel effect actually allows you to get more out of your direct drive wheel. Without the brake feel effect, you might have whatever the load would be without it, just from the basic self-aligning, but then the understeer is going to come in when you understeer and that'll go down, or whatever else happens, but that can only subtract from the load that's there. By having more load, as I say, you've got then more that can be subtracted, which allows you to get even more information from the sim, and that is really good if you've got a lower end force feedback wheel where you're really having to try and maximise the 5-6 newton meters or 3 newton meters that you've got available to you. So it's just having these as options that you can adjust to your taste is so good, and really absolutely transforms things. All sims should have something along these lines, but with very good default settings, and maybe only exposed as a super expert mode, because you don't want to confuse people that are new to sim racing. But crazy. Now, you do have stuff like this yaw kick, brake yaw, and throttle yaw. You've got additional settings on here that can additionally increase the counter steer when you get oversteer, or feel for oversteer, and basically allow you to preempt oversteer more, or if you've got lower end wheels or wheels that have more mechanical damping to them, can overcome the inertia that some wheels have. Not really a problem with any DD wheel. Personally, I turn all these things off. I feel like they introduce too much randomness and it makes the force feedback too over the top. But it would be well worth potentially delving into those settings on lower end wheels. If the default settings we've in our profile and just changing the strength, if you can't get the detail from them, it might be worth messing with those. But I personally feel like just turning all those off is too much. Maybe you could fiddle with it and get something extra special. It's too much. too much for me. Keep it simple. Contrary to what it might seem like with me and my views on force feedback, I actually personally really believe on a pure steering rack feel, and ideally that's just picking up the basic loading of the tyres as clear as possible. A pure rack force. Unfortunately, with Le Mans Ultimate and some new simulators, I think because they've got quite complicated tyre models, tyre flex, multiple contact patches, all the stuff going on, power steering, whatever else is in them, whatever's potentially simulated, even flex or inertia in the steering column, the steering rack, that I think ends up muting what would otherwise be a very detailed signal, which is one of the reasons why I think the more simple or older simulators have one contact point and maybe have a completely rigid steering rack simulated with no damper, no power steering. I think that's why they might give more detail. But using this app, you can get your detail back into LMU with its complex tyre model and physics. Whoa, sorry guys, I'm going off on a rant here. Right, you then have this setting is quite interesting. So you can do this thing called use in-game 400 Hz native force feedback, and this basically takes the telemetry channel that I believe is a 400 Hz telemetry channel, which is the steering rack, I believe, from the game directly. You might as well use that. Seems to work perfectly fine. You can turn that off and see how it feels differently, but this seems to work great, so we're using it. Quick note on force feedback hertz. Basically, if you pass 300 megahertz or 300 hertz, not megahertz, if you pass 300 hertz, force feedback will generally be really smooth. The advantage of having a higher hertz force feedback is mostly that you end up with a smoother signal, which then means that if you're doing other stuff with the signal, you can expand it or do stuff with it without it becoming grainy. Also, if you've got a simulator that has, like, say, 50 hertz or 100 hertz force feedback, then that would be quite a grainy signal generally. But then modern direct drive wheels and most modern force feedback wheels, they have like filters, reconstruction filters, smoothing, interpolation filters, and that would make even low hertz force feedback actually feel really nice and smooth, with you still getting decent detail. And the details that are really useful for feeling what a car's doing are actually details that happen quite slowly, like the loading of the tyre, the suspension loading, understeer and oversteer actually happen, comparatively speaking, over quite a large period of time. They're not things that you need a 400 hertz signal to capture the change. Higher hertz does have the advantage that it's generally smooth when you don't get that graininess with it, and you don't then need to do reconstruction filter. It does have the advantage for stuff like curbing and road texture, in that if it's a certain frequency, you're not it's not going to miss bumps out. But those things are still quite low frequency. 200 hertz would be perfectly fine. 300 hertz perfectly fine. People tend to get obsessed with higher numbers better, and actually, really, it's not necessarily the case. But like 400 hertz is a great amount. Like 500 hertz is a good amount. It is better for it to be a high number in some ways, but you quickly approach a point of diminishing returns. Right, we're moving on from hertz there. My head is hertzing. In-game force feedback gain is another way for you to change the force feedback signal. In fact, this, I think, allows you to, regardless of what you've got your settings to in-game, this actually bypasses all your in-game settings. So you could have it on 0 in the game, and then when you change this will actually change what that 400 hertz thing is working at. So you could turn this down if you wanted to change the strength, but just leave it at 100 and use the setting at the top to change the strength, and how we explained at the start. Not confusing having the same thing 4 times, really, is it? But, you know, that's exciting. Pure pass-through. Now, this is a thing to really make sure that you have unticked, unless you really just want to feel the game's force feedback. This will basically bypass a whole bunch of LMU FFB's stuff and just basically use the in-game's force feedback. So you really don't want this ticked if you're using LMU FFB, but maybe you want to quickly go from LMU FFB to not having it, or just fiddling around with it and just see what's different. You could just close the application, but yeah, so don't have that ticked, or do, it's up to you, but don't if you want to use LMU FFB. So we now have finer tuning options for the same stuff that you changed up here, so that like the understeer and the seat to the pants and those settings, you can fine tune how they operate. So here we go. So understeer effect, you can increase that. Again, if you start understeering, the force feedback gets lighter. You can also choose the curve for that. So if you want the understeer effect to come in more aggressively, so as soon as you understeer, it immediately gets light. Then you can turn this down, and that will be more sort of pokey, more immediate understeer. It'll come in faster. But if the understeer effect feels like it's coming in too soon, and doesn't line up with the tires at all, it just doesn't make any sense, you can increase it, and then the understeer effect will be a lot more subtle. I just like to leave that to 1.0. It seems to line up really nice. Interestingly, as a good example of a bad understeer effect, if you play the original Assetto Corsa and that has an understeer effect option on it, that is almost like it's like 100% here, and then on like a really aggressive curve. And what happens is, as soon as you slightly understeer in the original Assetto Corsa with that effect on, the wheel just gets totally light and it's basically useless. It's quite good for telling people that they are understeering. They might not be aware of that, so great, but it will completely remove all the detail. Having this control over that type of understeer thing basically allows you to use an understeer effect properly and make it so it's useful rather than just a step. Interestingly, though, if you're on a really low-end crappy wheel and you're not going to get much dynamics from it, you might find actually just having a much more brutal effect is the best you're going to get out of that wheel. And if you're brand new to sim racing, you might not really understand understeer intuitively, and you might not have good pedal precision for braking, accelerating, trail braking. So having a very abrupt, car's understeering, that could actually be quite useful to then learn how to then avoid doing that with a really obvious signal for it, and then you could dial your braking down, and as you got better you could then set it to a normal setting. So there's reasons why you could use an over-the-top understeer setting. I think we're probably going a bit too deep into things here. This video is going to take a decade to go through, but yeah, I keep this all to 1.0. Absolutely fantastic, and the whatever settings we put in the profile. Signal filtering and flat spot suppression. Right, here we go. Flat spot suppression, absolutely fantastic. I just use the defaults that they've got in the application. This filters out the flat spots that are bloody annoying in LMU with the LMP2 car and the hypercar. You don't tend to get flat spots in the GT3 cars because they've got ABS on them. But if you do a big slide in the GT3 car, you still get those annoying bumps. This completely reduces that. Absolutely fantastic. You can choose how much it reduces it by if you still like the flat spot, and you can also change the nature of it so that you can dial it into whatever you want. But the defaults I find totally fine. I think we might maybe just turn things up a bit, but that's really, really handy to have. There's also the option for a static filter that can filter a specific frequency. So you might be having a buzz from the game or something coming out of the game that you don't like. You can filter that frequency out. I've not had to do that. You shouldn't have to do that on most wheels, but it could be something you end up using with your specific wheel. Who knows? There's some force feedback safety features for jolts, lost frames, stutter. I've not fiddled with any of these or used them. I'm dangerous. I live on the limit. I'm so extreme. The ladies watch these videos, guys, and they're like, oh my god, he's out of control with his settings. I'm dangerous, really dangerous. Spike, so you've got some spike detection. Again, if you maybe have a slower computer and you get stutter, or you have your internet stops and things and the game spikes and you've got stronger force feedback, that could be quite useful to enable so that you don't get sudden jolts in your wheel and break your wrists. But you gotta live on the edge, guys. Load forces and G forces. Now this is quite interesting, because I need to import where's my hypercar. Now this is quite interesting because we found, fiddling around with this, the lateral load effect I don't put on doesn't seem to work in a useful way, or as I'd expect a lateral load to work. By all means, try it yourself, drive around, turn it off, put it on a high setting, see what it does, put it on a low setting. But the lateral G setting here, I find this really helps get rid of that center dead zone that you have, especially on the hypercars, and acts as like a sort of bridge from when you're going back to the center or you're doing a correction. And it helps remove that, as I say, like you're going from left to right or transferring over with the weight. It seems to actually smooth over that central dead zone. That central dead zone in the force feedback that's in the base game force feedback and there if you turn this off, I don't think that's necessarily unrealistic. Some cars, it depends on the caster, even the wheels, like huge slick tyres, the car geometry. There can actually be quite a space in the centre where, unless the wheels are turned, it's not loading onto them and things. So you might like that that sort of dead zone, but for me, I really want to always feel connected to like the loading of the forces on the tyres, especially when you're actually moving quickly or going through tighter corners. I want to feel the transition of the weight, and really as if it's like the G forces to some degree. So I'm always got a range of force on the tyre that correlates to the load I'm putting on the tyres, and that to me is similar or analogous to what you feel through your body in a real car, go-kart, bicycle, skiing, whatever you're doing. So turning this up, I found, allows it that you always seem to have like no dead zone in the centre. There's always some kind of force variance which you can then connect to what the car's doing. So that can be quite useful to turn up. I have found though, when you turn this up, it can end up muting some of the other stuff, so it's a choice how much you turn this up and how much you want to get rid of that dead zone. On our profiles we have this on 0, I think, with the GT3 and the LMP2, because they don't really have that dead zone so much in the centre. But yeah, if you're noticing the big space in the middle, try increasing this lateral G setting. It seems to fix that or improve that. You then have rear axle oversteer, lateral G boost slide. I don't know why I've set that to 51. I don't quite understand why or how these settings work. We've just fiddled with them, and that's the number we've got to. There is a description on each of these that explains what they do, but you know, you kind of have to just drive it yourself to feel what it does and how it interacts. I trust the description, but yeah. The self-aligning torque, though, is a really important signal. Actually, self-aligning, yeah. Seat of the pants self-aligning torque is really good for feeling when the back is gonna come out. So when you've got like oversteer, either like you're braking and the back's coming out, you're on the throttle, or you're turning and the back's really like starting to rotate around. So those moments where you're probably likely to lose the rear, this setting is really great, because as the back loads up and you've got yaw on the car, this gives you a bit of a counter force for that corresponds to how much load is going on there. So this allows you to really have, if you've been fortunate enough to sit in a real race car, especially cars with downforce, you can really feel. It's one of the primary things that race drivers are actually using to understand when the car's at the limit or the rotation of the vehicle. That rotation of the car, it's kind of like the traction loss thing that you would have on a motion rig that has traction loss, but again, this actually works better. It's more precise and works better than a £2,000 traction loss motion rig, because there's no delay really in the wheel, relatively speaking. But it allows you to feel that rotation as it's happening, which can be quite a quick rotation. The loading can go from a lot to little, depending on how much you're pushing. So you really want to dial this in. The thing to really be aware of seat of the pants type effects is that if you have it on too high, you can make your wheel very overactive, and that will actually make it harder to drive. So you really want to be careful with it and have it so it's enough that you can feel the load and get the information from it, but not so much that it's completely overriding what's going on with all the other force feedback. And there really is a real argument that it is an unnatural feeling to be having through the wheel. So I'd say if you want more literal force feedback of what you'd actually feel in a real car steering wheel, you probably want to use less of this. But as I say, in a real car, you feel stuff for your body. In a sim rig, even a sim rig with traction loss, I've used like £200,000. I think the most expensive rig I've been in was worth over £1 million. I've used very expensive motion rigs, and none of them really actually work better than this type of setting that you've got in IR-FFB and this. So I would use this, and just be careful with it though. But it's fantastic for really feeling the rear and knowing that the car's rotating. You will find with GT3 cars and hypercars that it doesn't work as clear as you would find with other vehicles that don't have TC. One of the things that TC does is obviously it controls the rotation of the rear, right? So that yaw is actually intervened by the traction control. So if you have TC on a high setting, you ain't going to feel much of this, because the car in the video game ain't doing much yaw. It's the traction control cut is controlling that. So what you'll actually feel is with the TC on higher, you'll feel that it sort of gets locked in a rotational amount and then stabilizes, because that's what you've set the TC to with the GT3 car, the hypercar, right? So weirdly, this type of thing is much more valuable when you're driving cars without TC in iRacing on Marvin's app or IR-FFB, F3, Skippy, you know, anything, Super Formula Lights, all those types of cars. This is much more useful. So yeah, you will find if you run aggressive traction control, you're not going to notice much of this. So be aware of that. But if you run lower traction control, you will feel more of this, and this allows you to actually have much more idea what the rear's doing. So when the track's wet or your tyres are worn out, wow, that's really useful, and it gives you a big advantage over people that can't feel that because they don't have a traction control motion rig or they don't have this force feedback. In before cheating comments. Real cars are cheating, guys, because the drivers can feel what they're doing. Can you believe it? Also, before we move on, well, we go full. This is 34 minutes. Bloody hell, everyone's going to die of old age. Before we move on, worth also saying, LMU is also very forgiving to drive, relatively speaking, compared to iRacing, even compared to like AMS1 in some ways, or some other games. LMU has a very forgiving tyre for the most part. There's some situations where it is unforgiving, but it's really quite allows you to overdrive quite aggressively. As a result, you don't need this as much as you do in iRacing. In iRacing, if you heat the tyres up by pushing them slightly too much, you die. They just turn off. Or they go into slot mode now with their newer tyre model that still has the same problems that the old tyre model has. It's just been made more mushy. Apparently that's enough to get a real race driver to say it's amazing, and no one uses critical thinking to actually test it and realise it's actually arguably worse in some ways. But in iRacing, this and the lack of TC with a lot of the cars in iRacing, this is instrumental to being able to ride on that rotational point before the tyres heat and fall off and you die, especially with the old tyre model. But when you've got tyres that are more realistic, where you can actually counter steer and the grip comes back after you've locked up, this isn't as important. But it's still a nice, useful thing to have. There we go. We got an iRacing disc in this video, but that's good to know. Curb strike rejection. This isn't to stop unions from protesting your terrible use of curbing. This just stops the curbs causing big jolts and things. I put this on 6%. I've not noticed any issues with it. Seem to help with not getting any big jolts. There you go. Might want to fiddle with that. Increase it, decrease it. Depends on your wheel settings. Your kick, I don't bother with this. Again, this is sort of like a boost, I think, to the seat of the pants setting, and makes it more aggressive. I personally don't recommend using that. I was finding we're getting sudden jolts and other things with it that we didn't really want. You can also filter these signals by applying a filter, and it will say the latency for how much the filter's introducing latency, but I think this just applies to your kick, so we're not actually using that latency filter there. You have specific additional seat of the pants boost basically in kicks for when you're off the throttle and only when you're accelerating. You can actually do quite interesting stuff with this and make the cars feel mega hooked up and mega active through the force feedback. But I just personally, again, it was giving too much signal, and it was hard to then isolate it and make it really work. So I've turned all those off, and I just keep with the simple stuff. As I say, less with force feedback motion rigs. Less is always more. It's like a cheesecake. Don't put too much stuff in it, otherwise it'll turn into like a eaten mess, not a cheesecake. Keep it simple, guys. Put your steak on the frying pan, bit of butter. Don't overcook it. Just eat it. You don't need anything else with it. Maybe a bit of salt, maybe a bit of pepper. That will do. That will do. Don't overcomplicate things. You don't have to be a French chef with this stuff. We also have some more smoothing options. We're not really using those. Again, more smoothing options. Not really fiddled with those. So the brake feel option. That's the longitudinal grip. Yes. I always get longitudinal lateral mixed up. Dyslexia. You can further adjust the brake feel. Again, this is the same setting as the setting at the top for the overall strength, but you can add in you can make the signal smoother, so it feels a bit more like the suspension is going down when you first brake, or it's not as abrupt. I prefer having this to be really abrupt, but depending on the car you're driving, depending on your preference, you might want to increase this number to make it less abrupt or decrease it to make it more abrupt. I like things to just feel super, super punchy. Again, if you're lucky enough to ever go, even like as a passenger drive in a Formula car, something with downforce, as soon as a driver gets on the brake or you get on the brake, to be fair, even in road cars on a track, if you even lifting off, you really feel it, but braking, it's like, it's really, really bloody obvious and very immediate. I think the fastest road car being around a racetrack is a Honda Type R, and that was really immediate. Radical SR3 is very immediate. So I think this on a lower setting, but you might just prefer more of a lead-in. I did find changing this response curve to cubic felt better, but just try those. Try different ones, but to me that just felt better for the braking feel. Then we get into vibrations. Good vibrations. Lock-up vibration, I found this really useful. Unfortunately, at the moment it doesn't seem to fully line up in all situations with being able to set it so that you always get a vibration just before it locks up. The way we've set it up is in most occasions you should start feeling a vibration through your wheel before it locks up, which is a really good way of knowing where the limited grip is. But LMU's a little bit finicky with locking up, especially if you've got a little bit of turning in. If you're putting, if you're trail braking or you're turning, or the tyres are a bit more worn out, the point at where it locks up is going to be different. But you can adjust the strength of the lock-up vibration. You can adjust the frequency of that vibration, and also you can set the scale at which it occurs. But as I say, I haven't really been able to get this to work ideally. But the settings we've got with the Hypercar and the GT3, you're not really going to lock up with the GT3 car because of ABS. You can if you put low ABS. We've got this set up in a way where it's gives you the information, but it's not going to really be crazy on the wheel. From my memory, I drove an Aerial Atom with slick tyres, and locking up in that, it was a very smooth lock-up feeling. It wasn't a vibration. I think slick tyres, they tend to just lock in a very smooth way. Rental go-karts as well tend to lock in a they don't vibrate so much. So this is what I tend to prefer. If you're using haptics, a vibrational stuff, I prefer it. If it's not a realistic vibration that you'd feel in a real car, I prefer it to be weaker and maybe higher frequency, because then in my mind it's like not a realistic feeling vibration, it's just giving me information. If it was a lower frequency vibration, you start getting into the territory of where you'd actually expect it to be a literal force vibration, like what you'd actually feel in a car. So if you've ever gone around a real track in a road car and you push on road tyres and you push through understeer, the tyres wobble and vibrate, and it's actually like a wobble vibration, not a buzz. It really is a similar frequency to going over curbing at a high speed, but it's a different feel. Incidentally, if you land a light aircraft and the wind is pushing it sideways on the runway, that actually does a similar thing as well. It's like the flex of the tyre, I think, grips, ungrips, and that creates the vibration. Tyres with stiffer sidewalls, I think, and slick tyres, they don't really tend to do that. That's also why slick tyres don't make the same skid sound as road tyres. Very interesting. I don't have a driver's license though, so you can't listen to anything I say. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I prefer that on artificial setting, and to avoid it accidentally feeling like a literal thing. But you can fiddle with that however you want. Again, you can change response curves. You can change how the slip occurs with these things. We've got it set up how we have. There's not much more to say on that. What I would say, actually, if the developer of the app is watching this and has got this far through the video, I feel sorry for them. I mean, this is 43 minutes, and it's 3:30 in the morning. We did 8-hour live streaming, and then I was like, I'll do this before we go to bed, and it's, oh dear, what's wrong with me? Anyway, if the developer sees this, what would be really nice is there is a vibration effect for road texture. Where is it? Here we go, road detail. So they've got more vibration effects further down here. Highly recommend putting on the dynamic load normalization. This normalizes things across different tyre loads, and on average we tend to just get better results without having to fiddle with things with that. However, the road details, well, first of all, the side rumble, this effect is nice. You can tell when you're sliding, but you can't dial it in a way to make it actually feel like a nice vibration. This really needs to have a different type of sine wave option. At the moment, it feels more like a sawtooth or a square wave. I think it being more of a sine wave, and maybe also having a damping filter on the slide rumble would be really good, and that would allow you to make it feel more like a tyre that's wobbling. That probably wouldn't be realistic for a slick tyre, but it would correlate with a different sensation for you pushing and sliding, and so that'd be really nice to have as a filter for this. You can experiment with turning this on and choosing how intense it is. I didn't like that on. It felt really artificial to me. And then the same thing also applies to the road details. This magnifies the bumps and stuff on the track. Even with this off, you will still feel curbing and road details through the bog standard force feedback. But if you want to feel a bit more road texture, you can turn this up. However, again, this really in the application could really do with some more filter options. Ideally, for road texture, again, it's probably not a literal thing that you'd actually feel through the steering wheel necessarily in a real car, so this is more like an immersive thing. What I think feels better and more realistic or doesn't feel obnoxious is when you have quite abrupt road texture signal, almost like a square wave, but with beveled edges on that square wave, or like a mixture of a sine wave and a square wave, right? And then being able to set that up so that you have this sort of nice granular road texture that's basically always there as you're going over the road. It describes the surface texture, but it's not like a pokey. It's not like a hammer on a brick. It's more like if you were to hold onto a bicycle tyre and bounce it on the floor and feel that sensation. Or if you've ever ridden a unicycle, you know how it feels. If you've ever, I doubt many of you ride unicycles. I, of course, have, because I was a circus clown in my youth. By the way, learning how to ride a unicycle, prepare to have a pummeled gooch and groin. Pro tip: don't ever try to learn to ride a unicycle. I still makes me wince thinking about it. But yeah, they really need to do some more filters for the road gain texture so that you can have a more punchy but somewhat dampened feel. You could turn this up, and you could use in your wheelbase software, you could remove higher frequencies and EQ on your wheelbase software to maybe achieve that effect. But generally, I think it'd be better if it could do it in this app, and then it'll be the same for everybody. I know some wheelbases don't have an EQ option on them, so it's good to have this sort of thing in the app. But there you go. I don't know what... scrub drag... Constant resistance force when pushing the tyres laterally. Understeer drag. I need to fiddle with that. I didn't fiddle with that. It could be quite useful. A bottoming effect. We've got that turned on. I've not really fiddled around with these vibrations. I'm not a real big fan of vibrations from the steering wheel. Like true force, full force vibrational effects, LFE. I find them really annoying and make the wheel feel really artificial and gamey, even though these sims are all games. So I actually prefer to normally turn these things down. Seatbelt tensioner is bloody amazing for vibrations of the road surface and those types of things, and bumps. And motion rig is even better for suspension movement. It's exquisite. But on a budget, tactile transducers are a billion times better than any DD wheel, because it's coming from the right place, from the front, from your ass. So that I would much rather use vibrations from tactile transducers. Check out our £150 motion rig video for that, for how to set up tactile transducers that are great. Bass speaker on the seat and 2 pucks on your pedals. Bloody good for £150. But there you go. I think that's most of the main stuff. And only 50 minutes. If you got to the end of this, congratulations. You'll probably have no life at all. I love this kind of stuff. I love what this app, what the developer's done of this. I would love this kind of stuff for more sims. I don't think this should all be exposed to noobs. I think this, they need to, even in this app, I think they're still working on this. This is not a 1.0 of the app. Having the overall options, like they started to do, to not confuse people is a great idea, and then expanding more advanced options. That's where they're kind of going with it. But especially if you were actually putting this stuff for a sim, you'd want to hide it all away, just have really good defaults and very simple options. But bloody amazing. If you like force feedback, this is much closer to what you get with the force feedback joysticks. We got a AB9 down here. You get all these options with force feedback joysticks, but sim racers are totally clueless about how good their force feedback could be from their wheelbases. There you go. Get my profile from Patreon. If you really like it and you want to support us, you can join our Patreon. I really appreciate that. Or just join for free. I like just having the members there is bloody amazing for me. Because otherwise I'm trapped with YouTube, whatever they do and whatever Twitch does. Don't think there's that much more to say other than go outside and touch grass and then get on your sim rig and do some racing. Right. Ask questions in the comments. I will answer them as best as I can. Till the next one, thank you very much for watching. Happy tea drinking. Take care. And if I find out that this video didn't record and is messed up and you can't see it, I'm going to have to redo this whole recording. I hope it isn't. I hope it's okay. Take care, guys. Goodbye.